Throughout history, there have been stories that challenge logic, cases where no explanation seems to fit. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at some of the most baffling unsolved mysteries, stories that remain unanswered even decades later. The Pollock Twins case is one of the most famous and controversial modern stories that proponents of reincarnation point to as possible evidence. It begins with a tragedy. In 1957, in the small town of Hexham in Northumberland, England, two young sisters, Joanna 11 and Jacqueline 6 Pollock, were killed in a devastating car accident. They were walking to church with a friend when a distraught woman attempting suicide deliberately drove into them. The town was left in shock, but none more so than the girls' parents, John and Florence Pollock. John, in particular, was deeply spiritual and believed firmly in reincarnation. Florence, more skeptical and religious in a traditional Christian sense, rejected such notions. Yet John's conviction only grew stronger over time. He claimed to have had dreams and visions, suggesting his daughters would return to him in another form. His certainty was reinforced when, just a year later, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Jennifer and Jillian, on October 4th, 1958. This in itself was remarkable, as twins did not run in the family and no fertility treatments were involved. As the twins grew older, John and Florence began to notice strange behaviors. Despite being young, Jennifer and Jillian appeared to have memories and knowledge they shouldn't possess. They would ask for toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline without ever having seen them. They accurately identified locations in Hexham that they had never been to, such as their deceased sister's former school and favorite park. On one occasion, Florence overheard the twins playing a game that seemed to reenact the tragic car accident. Jennifer lay on the floor with her head in Jillian's lap while Jillian said, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." The twins also displayed personality traits and preferences eerily similar to their late sisters. Joanna had been protective and mature, traits found in Jillian. Jacqueline was impulsive and adventurous, traits mirrored in Jennifer. Even more compelling were the physical similarities. Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist identical to Jacqueline's and a mark on her forehead that resembled a scar Jacqueline had gotten from a bicycle accident. These physical and behavioral likenesses became difficult for the parents to ignore. By the time the girls were around 5 years old, the strange memories began to fade. They grew into their own identities and no longer spoke of past lives. But the years prior left a profound mark on the family. John remained convinced that the twins were reincarnations of his lost daughters. He even corresponded with Ian Stevenson, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia who investigated over 2,000 cases of children claiming to remember past lives. Stevenson found the Pollock case particularly compelling and cited it in his work, though he admitted that definitive proof was elusive. Critics argue that the parents, especially John, could have influenced the twins consciously or subconsciously. Children are highly suggestible, and growing up in a household steeped in the memory of two deceased siblings could explain their behaviors. Still, the specificity of the twins' knowledge and the physical resemblances have left many wondering. The Pollock twins story continues to be one of the most cited modern examples of alleged reincarnation. Whether it was a genuine case of rebirth, an extraordinary coincidence, or the result of parental influence, the story taps into something deeply human, the desire to believe that death may not be the end, and that somehow those we lose can find their way back to us. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, the body of an unidentified man was discovered on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. He was lying on his back, head resting against the seawall, legs extended, and feet crossed. He wore a suit and polished shoes, but carried no identification. The man's death was mysterious enough on its own, but what followed turned it into one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in Australian history. Police were baffled. The man was in good health, had no visible wounds, and toxicology reports were inconclusive. Traces of poison were suspected, but no toxins were found. All tags had been removed from his clothing, and his fingerprints matched no known person in Australia or abroad. His dental records didn't help either. It was as if he had been deliberately erased. The case took a stranger turn when several weeks later, investigators found a hidden pocket in the waistband of his trousers. Inside was a small rolled-up piece of paper with the printed words, Tamam Shud. The phrase is Persian and translates to ended, or finished. It's the closing phrase of the Rubayat of Omar Khayyam, a book of poetry that emphasizes the fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of death. The police, hoping it was a clue, launched a search for a copy of the book from which the phrase had been torn. In a stroke of bizarre luck, a man came forward, stating that a book had mysteriously appeared in his car parked near the site. It was the Rubayat, and it had a torn-out section where the words Tamam Shud would have been. Even more intriguing was what was found inside the book. There was a strange code, 5 lines of capital letters, some crossed out. Cryptographers tried to crack it, but no solution was ever confirmed. Also included was a phone number belonging to a woman named Jo Thompson, who lived not far from where the body was found. When police interviewed her, she claimed not to know the man. However, upon seeing a cast of the dead man's face, she appeared visibly shaken, though she insisted she didn't recognize him. Speculation ran wild. Some believed the man was a Cold War spy, possibly involved in covert intelligence operations. His secrecy, coded message, and ties to a book with philosophical messages all seemed to point in that direction. Others believed he was a jilted lover or a suicidal stranger who had chosen to end his life in anonymity. Yet nothing in his behavior or clues confirmed any specific theory. Over the decades, amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike have revisited the Somerton Man case. In 2022, researchers claim to have identified the man as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker born in 1905. DNA extracted from hair on the body matched living relatives of Webb, apparently confirming his identity. However, questions remain. Why was he in Adelaide? Why did he erase his identity? And what was the meaning of the coded message? Despite these potential breakthroughs, the Tamam Shud case continues to captivate. It's not just the mystery of the man himself, but the layers of symbolism, misdirection, and near misses that have cemented it in public imagination. It remains a case where every answer only seems to raise more questions. In the early hours of Christmas Day, 1945, a fire consumed the home of George and Ginny Sodder in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The couple and 9 of their 10 children were inside the house when the blaze began. George and Ginny, along with 4 of the children, escaped the fire, but 5 of the children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny, and Betty, were never seen again. Despite the total destruction of the house, no remains of the 5 missing children were found in the ashes. Authorities quickly concluded that the children had perished in the fire and that the blaze was accidental, possibly due to faulty wiring. However, George and Ginny Sodder were unconvinced. They believed that their children had been kidnapped and that the fire was a cover-up. Their suspicions weren't without merit. In the months leading up to the fire, several strange events had occurred. A visitor to the Sodder home warned George that his house would be burned down because of his outspoken political views. Another man, supposedly looking for work, pointed to the fuse boxes and said they would cause a fire someday. George had recently argued with local officials over Mussolini, whom he criticized harshly, causing tensions in the local Italian community. The night of the fire brought even more anomalies. The telephone stopped working. A ladder that was always kept at the side of the house had vanished. A water barrel used to fight fires was mysteriously empty, and George's trucks. He tried to use them to reach the upper story of the house, failed to start, though they had worked just fine the day before. Additionally, a witness later came forward claiming to have seen balls of fire being thrown at the roof shortly before the fire started. After the fire, the Sodders began their own investigation. They hired a private investigator and placed a billboard along a highway with the photos of the 5 missing children, pleading for any information. Over the years, they received numerous tips. One woman claimed she had seen the children in a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia. Another said she saw them with unfamiliar adults, peering out of a car window as the house burned. A photo was even mailed to the family in 1967, allegedly showing Louis Sodder as an adult, though its authenticity was never verified. For decades, the Sodders refused to believe their children had died in the fire. They suspected a kidnapping, perhaps tied to organized crime, retribution for George's political views, or even human trafficking. They maintained the billboard until both George and Jenny passed away. The official investigation was closed in the 1950s, with authorities maintaining that the children had died in the fire. But no bones, no ashes, and no definitive proof were ever found. Experts argue that a fire of that size and duration could not have completely incinerated 5 bodies without leaving any trace.
To this day, the fate of the Sodder children remains one of the most confounding unsolved mysteries in American history. Whether they perished in the fire or were abducted under the cover of flames, the lack of evidence continues to haunt investigators and amateur sleuths alike.
On August 20th, 1966, a young boy flying a kite stumbled upon a disturbing scene on Vintem Hill in Niterói, Brazil. There, he found the bodies of 2 men lying side by side in matching formal suits and waterproof coats, with strange lead masks placed over their eyes. The discovery would evolve into one of the most puzzling and enduring mysteries in Brazilian history. The 2 deceased men were later identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes. They had left their town a few days earlier, reportedly on a trip to purchase work equipment. According to witnesses, they were seen boarding a bus carrying a substantial amount of cash, waterproof coats, and a notebook. When the bodies were discovered, investigators noted several oddities. Both men were lying peacefully, with no signs of struggle or trauma. Next to them were an empty water bottle and a packet containing 2 wet towels. More baffling was a handwritten note found nearby. It read 1630, be at the determined location. 1830, ingest capsules. After effect, protect metals. Await signal mask. This cryptic instruction, especially the reference to capsules and masks, fueled a whirlwind of speculation. Despite an extensive investigation, no conclusive cause of death was ever determined. An autopsy revealed no visible injuries or signs of violence. Toxicology tests, crucial in understanding whether the men had ingested any drugs or poisons, were inconclusive, possibly due to delays in the examination. The lead masks, homemade and crudely cut, resembled those used to protect against radiation. Yet, there was no indication that the men had been exposed to radioactive materials. The most widely accepted theory is that Cruz and Viana were experimenting with spiritual or paranormal phenomena. Some locals reported that the men were interested in spiritualism and may have belonged to a local group attempting to contact extraterrestrials or spirits. The note, the masks, and the timing all point toward a ritual or planned encounter. However, this theory remains speculative, as no definitive link to any spiritual group was found. Alternative explanations range from accidental poisoning to foul play, yet no evidence supports either with certainty. No suspects were ever identified, and the case was eventually closed without resolution. Family members of the deceased were left with more questions than answers. What were the capsules? Who or what was the signal? And why did they need to protect metals? Over the years, the lead masks case has been featured in numerous documentaries, podcasts, and conspiracy theory forums. It remains one of Brazil's most infamous unsolved mysteries, not only for its bizarre details, but also for the utter lack of explanation, despite the evidence.
To this day, the deaths of Cruz and Viana serve as a haunting reminder of how even the strangest clues can lead nowhere. Whatever their intentions that day, the truth behind the lead masks was buried with them on that hill. In October 1984, a German food technician named Günther Stoll muttered a cryptic word, YOGTZE, and vanished from his home in Anshausen. A few hours later, he was found fatally injured in his wrecked car under mysterious circumstances. To this day, his case remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in Europe. Günther Stoll had been experiencing increasing paranoia in the days leading up to his disappearance. He frequently told his wife that they were out to get him, though he never identified who they were. On the evening of October 25th, he suddenly stood up from his seat at home and exclaimed, "Now it's clear." He then scribbled down the letters YOGTZE on a piece of paper, later determined not to correspond to any known word or code. Moments later, he crossed it out, left the house, and disappeared into the night. Later that night, Stoll visited a pub in Wilnsdorf, where he ordered a beer but collapsed before taking a sip. Witnesses said he was not drunk, but he appeared agitated and confused. From there, his movements became difficult to trace. Several hours passed before his car, a Volkswagen Golf, was found in a ditch near the town of Hagen, over 100 kilometers from his home. What made the discovery even stranger was the condition in which Stoll was found. He was naked, seriously injured, and barely conscious. He was taken to a hospital where he later died. Before dying, he claimed that 4 unknown men had been in the car with him. Despite this, no evidence of other passengers was ever found. The car showed signs of having been driven off the road deliberately, but not at high speed. And Stoll's injuries did not align with a standard car accident. They were more consistent with having been run over by a vehicle elsewhere. The term YOGTZE became a focal point of the investigation. Though it looked like a license plate or code, it didn't match any known registry, military designation, or cryptographic system. Some speculated that the G was actually a poorly written 6, possibly referring to yogurt with the additive TITSI, though this never led to a solid lead. Despite attempts to decipher it, Yogte has remained an enigma. Stoll's claims about them trying to kill him were taken more seriously after his death. Investigators considered the possibility of foul play, especially since his injuries suggested he had been struck by a car while already out of his own vehicle. However, no suspects were ever identified, and no motive was ever uncovered. Over the decades, the case has become a favorite among true crime enthusiasts and internet sleuths. Countless theories have been proposed, from espionage to mental illness, from mob involvement to secret codes. But every potential explanation raises more questions than answers.
To this day, the YOGTZE case remains unsolved. With no witnesses, no viable suspects, and a single word scrawled in desperation, Günther Stoll's mysterious final night continues to baffle investigators and haunt those fascinated by unexplained events.
In October 1955, the MV Joyita, a merchant vessel operating in the South Pacific, disappeared without a trace, only to be found 5 weeks later, adrift and abandoned. The eerie state of the ship and the complete disappearance of all 25 passengers and crew have made it one of maritime history's most baffling, unsolved cases. The MV Joyita set sail from Apia, Samoa on October 3, 1955, headed for the Tokelau Islands. Though the trip was expected to take less than 2 days, the ship never arrived. A massive search was launched across hundreds of square miles of open ocean, but not a single sign of the Joyita or her crew was found during that period. On November 10th, nearly 5 weeks after her disappearance, the Joyita was spotted by a merchant vessel over 600 miles off her intended course. She was listing heavily to one side and partially submerged. When investigators boarded her, they were stunned by what they found, or more precisely, what they didn't. All 25 passengers and crew were missing. The lifeboats were gone, the radio had been tuned to the international distress frequency, but it was damaged and incapable of sending a signal. Despite this, there was no sign of a struggle or violence. The ship's logbook, navigation equipment, and some cargo were missing, but there was no indication as to what had happened during the voyage. Even stranger was the fact that the vessel was still technically seaworthy. Investigators concluded that the Joyita had developed a mechanical fault that caused flooding in the engine room, but not enough to sink her. She was built with a cork-lined hull designed to keep her afloat even when damaged. This raised the question: why would the crew abandon a floating vessel? Multiple theories have been proposed over the decades. One suggests that the captain became incapacitated or died, leading the inexperienced crew to panic and abandon ship. Another posits a sudden attack by pirates or hostile forces, though no evidence of such an event was ever found. A more conspiratorial idea involves covert government activity in the region, with some suggesting the Joyita may have stumbled upon something it wasn't supposed to see. Despite extensive inquiries and speculation, no bodies were ever recovered, and no wreckage from the missing lifeboats was found. The fate of the people aboard remains an enduring enigma, with every new theory only deepening the mystery. The MV Joyita now sits in maritime lore alongside other famous ghost ships like the Mary Celeste, an unsolved case marked by a vanishing crew, a perfectly floatable ship, and a lack of any logical explanation. What happened in those lost 5 weeks remains a mystery lost to the depths of the Pacific.
In June 2014, 28-year-old German tourist Lars Matank vanished under mysterious circumstances while on vacation in Bulgaria. His disappearance, caught partly on airport surveillance footage, has since become one of the most perplexing modern missing person cases, drawing intense speculation from online sleuths and investigators alike. Lars had traveled with friends to the seaside resort of Golden Sands. According to those close to him, he was in good spirits and enjoying his holiday, but an altercation at a local bar, possibly over football rivalries, left him with a ruptured eardrum. A local doctor advised him not to fly home immediately, so his friends returned to Germany without him. Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport in Varna to wait for his ear to heal. That's when things took a strange turn. Lars began texting his mother saying he was scared and that people were trying to kill or poison him. He even asked her to cancel his credit cards. He reportedly left the hotel abruptly, claiming he was being followed. Some witnesses later reported seeing him acting paranoid, hiding in alleyways, and avoiding people. The next day, July 8th, he visited the airport clinic for a final checkup. The doctor cleared him for flying, but while inside the clinic, something caused Lars to panic. Without warning, he bolted out of the building, leaving behind his luggage, passport, and all his belongings. Surveillance cameras captured him sprinting out of the terminal, jumping over a fence, and disappearing into a nearby forest. He was never seen again. The footage quickly went viral. It shows Lars looking anxious, glancing over his shoulder, and running with clear urgency, yet no one else is visible. Despite extensive searches of the area and numerous online campaigns, not a single confirmed sighting or piece of evidence has emerged since that day. Various theories have been proposed. Some believe Lars suffered a psychotic episode, possibly triggered by head trauma or a reaction to medication. Others think he may have been involved in illicit activities or witnessed something he shouldn't have. There's also speculation about foul play, though no suspects were ever identified. His family has never stopped searching. His mother, in particular, has remained active in the media and on social platforms, pleading for information. Despite the attention, the case remains as baffling today as it was in 2014. What drove a healthy young man to flee an airport in terror and vanish without a trace? Until new evidence surfaces, the disappearance of Lars Matank remains an unsolved mystery, one that continues to grip the imagination of all who hear it.